The Galactic Union prided itself on peace, but peace had a price. And for centuries, humanity had been the one paying it. Humans were a curiosity in the grand cosmic order, a relatively young species, physically weaker than most, with no natural advantages that stood out. No claws, no venom, no psychic abilities. Their worlds were unremarkable, their military unimpressive, their influence negligible. But they were useful. The Tlath used them as cheap labor, sending humans into mines too unstable for their own workers. The Vashan hired them as mercenaries, disposable bodies for wars fought over distant moons. The Urine aristocracy kept them as entertainers and servants, marveling at how long they could endure mistreatment without complaint. Humanity endured because it had no choice. Until the day something changed. The incident began on New Geneva, one of the few human-controlled planets left in the galactic core. It had been a hub of trade, its people known for their ability to negotiate even in the most hostile of circumstances. Humans had learned to survive through diplomacy, finding ways to make themselves indispensable while avoiding outright conflict. But to the rest of the galaxy, their tolerance was seen as submission. So when the Zalari fleet arrived, no one was surprised. The Zalari were an expansionist race, ruthless in their conquests, seeing themselves as the rightful rulers of the stars. They didn't waste time with negotiations. They sent an ultimatum. New Geneva now belonged to the Zalari Empire. Surrender, or be eradicated. For days, the human government pleaded for intervention. They reached out to the Galactic Union, invoking ancient treaties of protection. They begged the core worlds for aid, reminding them of humanity's contributions, its labor, its technology, its loyalty. But no help came. The Zalari took what they wanted. Cities were razed, families were torn apart, and those who resisted were executed in the streets as an example. The rest of the galaxy barely took notice. It was just another annexation, another minor species falling in line. Except humanity didn't fall in line. They watched as their people were slaughtered, as their voices were ignored, as their so-called allies turned away. And in that moment, something inside them snapped. There was no grand speech, no singular declaration. Just a silent, collective decision that spread like wildfire across every human colony, every outpost, every remaining fleet. Enough. Enough of the humiliation. Enough of the exploitation. Enough of being seen as weak. If the galaxy saw humanity as powerless, then it had made the greatest mistake in its history. Because when humans decided to fight, they fought like no species had ever fought before. And no one was ready for what came next. New Geneva was gone. What was once a thriving human colony, a beacon of resilience in the galactic core, had been turned to rubble in a matter of days. The Zalari, efficient in their brutality, left no room for resistance. Those who survived the initial bombardment were either enslaved or executed. And the worst part? The rest of the galaxy barely noticed. The Galactic Union issued a standard condemnation of the attack, empty words, spoken by politicians who had no interest in challenging the Zalari. The core worlds, the so-called keepers of peace, did nothing. Even those who had once called humanity an ally refused to act. Humans had learned to survive through compliance, through negotiation, through patience. But there was no negotiating with annihilation. For the first time in history, humanity was backed into a corner. And that was the galaxy's first mistake. A history of humiliation. The tragedy of New Geneva wasn't an isolated event, it was just the final insult in a long history of exploitation. Humans had always been tolerated, never respected. Their worlds were taxed at higher rates than others, their ships were the first to be searched at security checkpoints, and their people were treated as little more than useful workers in the great galactic machine. The Tlath kept them in mining colonies, forcing them to extract precious resources from hostile environments. The Urine aristocracy paraded them around as entertainment, marveling at their primitive endurance. The Vashans sent human mercenaries to fight battles they didn't want their own soldiers to die in. Even on mixed-species stations, humans were second-class citizens. They weren't allowed in certain high-status areas, their businesses faced constant restrictions, and they were always reminded that they were lesser. And for centuries, humanity took it. Not because they were weak, but because they believed they had time. That if they proved themselves valuable, if they worked harder, if they showed the galaxy that they could be more than just tools, then maybe, just maybe, things would change. But New Geneva proved the truth: the galaxy would never see them as equals unless they forced it to. The first signs of defiance. At first, the change was subtle. On the outer colonies, workers began refusing orders from their alien overseers. Not openly, not yet, but they started making mistakes. Shipments were delayed. Machinery broke down. Entire supply chains slowed to a crawl. On space stations, human engineers stopped fixing critical systems, causing power failures in sections controlled by their oppressors. In the mining colonies, humans started sabotaging equipment, staging accidents that crippled production. The powerful species of the galaxy saw these as inconveniences, not defiance. But then came the first real act of resistance. On a Zalari-controlled industrial world, a human transport ship was scheduled for inspection, a euphemism for seizure. Normally, the crew would comply, surrendering their cargo, their vessel, and in many cases, their freedom. This time, they didn't. When the Zalari boarding party forced their way onto the ship, they found the cargo hold empty. No supplies, no crew, nothing but a single device mounted to the walls. A human-made electromagnetic pulse bomb. The explosion disabled not just the Zalari vessel, but the entire orbital security grid, allowing dozens of human ships to escape from the planet undetected. For the first time, humanity had struck back. And the galaxy barely noticed. Whispers of a storm. The Zalari wrote the incident off as sabotage by rogue criminals. They doubled their security, increased patrols, and continued as if nothing had changed. But it had. Humanity had learned something that day: they were stronger than the galaxy believed. They didn't have the biggest fleets or the deadliest weapons. They didn't have psychic abilities or genetic enhancements. But they had something far more dangerous: a will to fight that no one had accounted for. In the shadows, human scientists worked in secret, designing weapons that exploited the weaknesses of their enemies. Military strategists devised battle plans using unconventional, unpredictable tactics. And across the galaxy, humans whispered the same words. No more. Their defiance had begun. And soon, the galaxy would realize what it had done. For centuries, the dominant species of the galaxy had believed they understood humanity. They saw them as adaptable, yes, but not dangerous. Industrious, but never independent. Resilient, but never revolutionary. Humans were tolerated because they were useful, cheap labor, expendable soldiers, and resourceful engineers who never asked for more than what they were given. That assumption was their first mistake. Because when humanity finally decided to fight, the galaxy learned a hard truth. The most dangerous enemy is the one you never saw coming. The first sparks of resistance. News of the transport ship's sabotage spread through human colonies like wildfire. Most still lived under the boot of alien rule, but something had changed. Fear, long their greatest chain, was breaking. On industrial planets, human workers, once too afraid to resist, began to organize in secret. They worked slower, broke machinery in ways that couldn't be easily repaired, and sent encrypted messages through maintenance networks, coordinating in ways their oppressors couldn't detect. On space stations, human engineers embedded malicious code deep within the systems, waiting for the right moment to trigger chaos. On outer rim colonies, farmers and laborers, once seen as harmless, began stockpiling supplies. food, medical gear, weapons. And within human-controlled space, something even more dangerous was happening. The hidden arsenal. The galaxy had always believed that humans were weak because they lacked advanced weaponry. That was their second mistake. In the lawless edges of space, human scientists had been working in secrecy, developing technology that turned their greatest weaknesses into strengths. The Zalari, the undisputed military powerhouse, relied on overwhelming force. Their ships were massive, slow-moving fortresses with energy shields impervious to traditional weapons. But what they didn't consider was kinetic weaponry, something humans had perfected long before they ever reached the stars. While energy shields could repel directed plasma and disrupt energy-based weapons, they were useless against high-speed, solid projectiles. So humanity adapted. They created railgun platforms that could fire tungsten slugs at near-light speeds, shredding through enemy ships as if their defenses didn't exist. They designed stealth technology that ran cold, undetectable to thermal and electromagnetic scanners. They built virus-like AI programs that could infiltrate enemy networks and shut down entire fleets with a single command. And they didn't stop there. The turning of allies. For the first time in history, humanity's defiance caught the attention of others. The Galactic Union had always assumed that if humans ever fought back, they would be alone. That was their third mistake. Not every species saw humans as disposable. Some saw them as valuable. Others saw them as inspiring. And a few saw them as an opportunity. The Dravari, a reptilian race known for their mercenary culture, respected strength above all else. For centuries, they had looked down on humans as little more than workers and entertainers. But when whispers spread of human rebels standing against the mighty Zalari, the Dravari began to take interest. The Riln, a race of traitors who had suffered under the same oppression as humans, saw potential in an alliance. And even within the core worlds, there were those who began to wonder if humanity's rise could shift the balance of power in ways they could use to their advantage. The first victory. The Zalari still believed that humanity's defiance was nothing more than an inconvenience. So when they sent a fleet to a rebellious human colony to restore order, they expected an easy victory. Instead, they found something else. The humans had evacuated the colony ahead of time, leaving behind only automated defenses, decoys, and hidden railgun platforms. The first Zalari battleship was torn apart before it even knew it was under attack. The second lost control of its systems when an undetected AI virus infiltrated its network. The third, captured by human forces, was taken apart, studied, and repurposed for their own use. The battle lasted less than an hour. When the smoke cleared, the galaxy had no choice but to take notice. Humanity had won. And for the first time, the galaxy realized it had underestimated them. It was too late to stop what was coming. The first human victory wasn't just a tactical success, it was a message. Across the galaxy, it was as if a switch had been flipped. For centuries, humans had bowed their heads, swallowed their pride, and endured. Now, they were done. And the galaxy was not ready. The first coordinated strikes. The Zalari, enraged by their embarrassing loss, responded the only way they knew how, with overwhelming force. A fleet of warships was dispatched to the nearest human-controlled sector, intent on making an example of them. Their plan was simple: crush the rebellion before it could spread. But humanity had no intention of playing by the old rules. The moment the Zalari fleet arrived, they found nothing but empty space. No human ships. No resistance. Just dead silence. Then, without warning, chaos erupted. Communications blacked out, AI-driven viruses tore through their systems, shutting down fleet-wide coordination. Engines failed, ships drifted helplessly as power cores went cold. Then the railguns fired. Invisible to enemy scanners, human ships had already positioned themselves ahead of time. Kinetic rounds, traveling at near light speeds, ripped through Zolari hulls. Their energy shields, so effective against plasma and lasers, were useless against solid projectiles. Within minutes, half the fleet was either disabled or destroyed. The remaining ships tried to retreat, but that was when they realized the final horror. They weren't just fighting an enemy. They were fighting an enemy that had studied them, learned from them, and adapted. The galaxy begins to panic. The shockwaves of humanity's retaliation spread faster than light itself. For the first time in recorded history, an inferior species had not only resisted but had decisively beaten one of the strongest militaries in the galaxy. And they weren't stopping. Across occupied human territories, sleeper cells activated. Engineers, miners, and even civilian transport crews, long seen as harmless, rose up, sabotaging supply lines and seizing control of infrastructure. Entire planets fell to human forces without a single battle. The Galactic Union, which had ignored humanity's struggles for centuries, was now faced with an undeniable reality. The humans weren't just fighting back. They were winning. Divide and conquer. The Zolari High Command demanded an emergency response. A full-scale military campaign. Annihilation if necessary. But not everyone agreed. The realm traders, who had relied on human ingenuity for centuries, saw a chance for profit in siding with them. The Dravari mercenaries, impressed by humanity's unexpected ferocity, offered their services to the highest bidder. And even within the Union, whispers grew louder. If humanity could break free, what did that mean for every other species that had suffered under Zolari dominance? The cracks in the galaxy's power structure were beginning to show. And humanity was more than happy to widen them. A message to the galaxy. The final blow of the retaliation came in the form of a broadcast, hacked into every Galactic Union transmission across the stars. A human stood before the camera. Not a politician, not a general, just a simple worker. Their voice was calm. Their words were clear. We were once the builders of your empires. The soldiers of your wars. The workers of your industries. You saw us as weak. Disposable. Less than you. You were wrong. We are not here to ask for freedom. We are here to take it. The broadcast ended. The message was received. The galaxy held its breath. And then, the war truly began. Humanity had struck first, and hard. But victory was never free. As the initial euphoria of retaliation faded, the grim reality of war set in. The galaxy was waking up to the threat humanity posed, and the retaliation that followed was ruthless. The consequences begin. The Zolari, humiliated by their failure, abandoned all restraint. Where they had once ruled with economic and political dominance, they now ruled with fire and blood. Entire colonies were targeted. Cities that had once been thriving hubs were bombarded from orbit, reduced to nothing but rubble. Hostages were taken. Human leaders, scientists, and civilians, anyone of value, were rounded up and made examples of. Allies were tested. Species that had begun to sympathize with humans were forced to pick sides. Some remained loyal to the Union. Others vanished into the shadows, waiting to see who would truly come out on top. For the first time since the war began, humanity found itself on the back foot. The weight of leadership. In a hidden war council on a remote asteroid base, the human resistance gathered. The leaders, once simple workers, soldiers, and scientists, were now the last hope for their species. Tensions ran high. Some argued for all-out war, for wiping the Zolari from existence. Others insisted on strategy, on building alliances before it was too late. And some wondered if humanity had gone too far. We wanted freedom, one voice murmured in the darkened room. But at what cost? No one had an answer. A galaxy in flux. As the war raged, something else was happening. The realm traders, once neutral, began smuggling weapons and resources to human forces in secret. The Dravari mercenaries, seeing the chaos unfold, refused contracts from the Zalari, a move that sent shockwaves through the Union's military structure. The weaker species, long oppressed by the Union, began whispering of rebellion. If humans could defy the greatest power in the galaxy, then maybe they could too. But for every sign of hope, there was devastation. A devastating blow. Then came the moment that nearly broke humanity. A major resistance stronghold, one of the largest hidden bases, was betrayed. The Zalari launched a coordinated strike, catching the humans completely off guard. Thousands of resistance fighters were slaughtered. Entire supply caches, gone. Key leaders, executed. The galaxy watched as the news spread. The mighty human rebellion had suffered its first major defeat. And the message was clear. The Zalari were done playing. The breaking point. Again. Across the scattered human forces, despair set in. The loss was unbearable. Had they made a mistake? Had they underestimated the Union's wrath? But in the heart of that darkness, something else sparked. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was resolve. Because now, humanity understood the truth. There was no turning back. No surrender. No more mercy. And if the Zalari thought this war was over, they were about to learn just how much fight humanity still had left. The battle wasn't done. It was just beginning. The galaxy believed the human resistance had been crushed. The Zalari were already celebrating their victory, convinced that humanity would either beg for mercy or die out in the shadows. They had no idea what was coming. A war of the mind. Humanity had always been outnumbered. Outgunned. Outmatched in sheer military power. But they had never been outsmarted. The Zalari relied on brute force, overwhelming their enemies with numbers and firepower. Humanity, on the other hand, thrived on adaptation, deception, and innovation. With their largest stronghold destroyed, the remaining human forces vanished into the void. They stopped fighting head-on. Instead, they fought where the enemy least expected. Hit-and-run strikes. Zalari supply chains were targeted. Their ships were sabotaged mid-flight. Their weapons turned against them. Psychological warfare. Mysterious broadcasts flooded Zalari networks, exposing their lies, rallying oppressed species, and sowing discord in their ranks. Strategic assassinations. Key Zalari commanders started vanishing, one by one, never to be seen again. It wasn't war. It was systematic dismantling. And the Zalari began to panic. The whisper of rebellion. For the first time in centuries, the Union wasn't just dealing with humans. Other species, once cowed into submission, began to rise. The realm smugglers openly defied Union trade laws, funneling weapons and ships to the resistance. The oppressed worlds of the Union, those who had suffered under Zalari rule for generations, began to riot, emboldened by humanity's defiance. The Dravari mercenaries, once neutral, joined the fight. Not for money, but because they had seen something they had never seen before. A species willing to die rather than live in chains. The galaxy was shifting. And humanity was no longer fighting alone. The ultimate plan. But the Zalari were still too powerful. Their fleets still controlled the core worlds. If the war dragged on too long, humanity would eventually be worn down. They needed one final strike. A plan so audacious, so impossible, that no one would ever see it coming. The target? The Union's Central Command. A fortified station, deep in Zalari space. Heavily guarded. A place no army could ever breach. But humanity wasn't sending an army. They were sending ghosts. A small, elite team of human operatives. A stolen Zalari warship. A single chance to bring the war to the enemy's doorstep. If they failed, the resistance was finished. If they succeeded, the galaxy would never be the same. The final gamble. As the human strike team prepared for their mission, the Zalari still believed they were winning. They saw humanity as desperate. Broken. Beaten. They didn't realize that humanity had just done something far more dangerous than fight back. They had learned. And tomorrow, when the Union awoke, they would wake up to a new galaxy. The Zalari High Command was untouchable. Or so they thought. The infiltration. The stolen Zalari warship drifted toward Xiphos Prime, the Union's most fortified command station. It was the beating heart of their empire, where strategies were devised, wars were declared, and entire species were sentenced to subjugation. No one in their right mind would dare attack it. That's why humanity did. The strike team was small, just 6 operatives. They wore stolen Zalari exosuits, their voices disguised by synthetic modulators. Their mission? Upload a virus into the Union central network, crippling their ability to coordinate the war. The risk? If they were caught, there would be no rescue. But they weren't here for rescue. They were here to end the war. The moment everything changed. The infiltration went smoothly, at first. The human team moved undetected through the station's corridors. The virus was uploaded. Systems began shutting down. And then, an alarm blared. The Zalari knew. Security forces swarmed the halls. Heavy boots pounded against metal flooring. The humans were cornered, blasters raised, surrounded by soldiers ready to end them. Then came the voice. The supreme commander of the Zalari Union. His image flickered to life on the station's holodisplays. Humans. You have fought bravely. But this is where it ends. Surrender, and we may allow some of you to live. The lead operative, helmet cracked, breathing heavy, lifted his head and smiled. No. This is where it begins. He pressed a final command. And the entire galaxy changed. The collapse of the Union. Every Zalari warship lost power at once. The command station's defenses shut down. The oppressed worlds, waiting for a signal, rose up in rebellion. From one end of the galaxy to the other, the Zalari grip shattered. Humanity's defiance had spread like wildfire. And now, even species who once feared the Union were fighting for their freedom. The aftermath. Xiphos Prime fell. The war ended within weeks. The Zalari, once the most feared species in the galaxy, sued for peace. Humanity, once considered weak, had done the impossible. Not through brute force. Not through sheer numbers. But through willpower, unity, and the refusal to break. The life lesson. As the dust settled, the galaxy had one final realization. Humanity had never been the most powerful species. They had never been the strongest, fastest, or most technologically advanced. But they had one thing no one else did. They endured. When others would surrender, they resisted. When others would submit, they adapted. When others saw hopelessness, they found a way forward. And when they finally snapped, when they finally fought back, no one was prepared. Because humans? They don't lose. They just decide when the fight is over.